Welcome back. It's a big international story with possible local ramifications. Ukraine and its Western allies are very upset after Russia announced it will send peacekeeping troops, as they call it, to two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. Now, the self-declared People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk are home to Russia-backed rebels who've been fighting Ukraine forces there. It goes back a number of years, all the way to 2014. Western media have been reporting that Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine after it re-energized, this is Ukraine, re-energized its plans to join the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance. You'll know the acronym probably better, that is NATO. For more on this, Stephen Gruzd from the South Africa Institute of International Affairs joining us. Stephen, good morning to you. And this is an incredibly complicated history between these two countries. I listened to part of what Vladimir Putin was talking about. He went as far back as Lenin and the Tsars. A lot of it just filibustering is the popular opinion. But the fact remains, these peacekeeping troops are standing pretty much on the border with Ukraine. Why should South Africa be concerned about this?
Well, I think the world is so interconnected that what happens in one part is going to affect the other part. I mean, some of the implications will be on food security because Russia and Ukraine are both huge exporters of wheat and rye and other staple commodities that we use for our food. And that, if a full-scale war erupts, that could be interrupted, the prices could go up, and it will have a knock-on effect. One only has to look at the rand to see how volatile it is on any normal occasion. As markets are thrown into turmoil, the rand could depreciate considerably. That causes inflation. That causes higher petrol prices. Also, I think the symbolism of this, of a large country bullying a small country, wanting to invade it, trashing its history, violating its sovereignty, is interesting in Africa, where we accepted the colonial borders as the borders at independence so as not to unravel the whole map of the continent and be racked by conflicts. I think we're racked by conflicts anyway, but if we see this happening in Europe, the very heart of where democracy was first invented, it does send a signal to African countries that this is okay, that bigger countries can bully smaller countries. And for me, that's totally unacceptable. So, yes, this is far away, and it's two northern countries fighting each other. But it would be very interesting, for example, to see what South Africa says about these latest developments. If anything, it's kept very quiet. It doesn't want borders to be questioned in Africa. But now what happens when its ally from the BRICS, Russia, is seriously seeking to revise the borders of the map of Europe?
You raised such a good point. I was about to ask you about BRICS as well in this. Yes, we have Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. It's not just Russia that we are in partnership with as far as the economic bloc is concerned, but China is obviously going to play a part in this, hopefully, a war, a potential war that could come out, which hopefully we hope is not going to happen. Because we have to be very careful about our relations with Russia and China, or more complicated, if we throw more chess pieces onto the board. If China chooses to get involved, as South Africa doesn't want to, where does it leave us? It leaves us in a very precarious position, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, China and Russia have been growing ever closer together. They recently held a summit by the heads of state, and there was a long communique that came out of that. China provides cover for Russia. They both believe that the West uses the pretext of democracy and human rights as a first means towards regime change. I think South Africa will tread very carefully. It doesn't want to upset its biggest, one of its biggest trading partners in China. But the geopolitics of this is very interesting. As the US and Europe push Russia, it may be into the very open arms of Xi Jinping in a China that is rising and taking on more of an international role. Most countries on the sidelines, like China and Russia, have hitherto said, we believe in dialogue, we don't believe in war, we don't believe in violence, this can be resolved, but the historical wrongs of the past must be righted. I mean, in some ways, what Putin is doing is trying to redraw the map of Russia and bring us back to 1989 when Russia was part of the Soviet Union and had a massive sphere of influence in Eastern Europe.
I don't want to be melodramatic on this, but there is suggestions this could be, if it were to happen, I certainly hope it doesn't, the worst conflict since 1945 and World War II. Where do you stand on that? Because 1945 was devastating. Let's fast forward to 2022 and the kind of weaponry we all know exists today.
Well, exactly. I mean, the weaponry is far more sophisticated, far more deadly. One cannot forget that Russia is a nuclear-armed state and has thousands of nuclear weapons that haven't been dismantled. It's my understanding that there are also thousands in the Ukraine, which was, of course, part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union stationed nuclear weapons there. But even conventional weapons have advanced so far since 1945, and Russia has put a veritable arsenal on the borders, and now, with these two breakaway republics, is starting to move weapons and people in to support these little rump statelets that have now declared independence and that Russia has recognized. So, yes, it could be devastating. I mean, we last saw war in Europe, I guess, in the Balkans and the breakup of Yugoslavia, but it didn't really have a large international dimension. This is really going to be the first time that a state has invaded another state in Europe since, Russia invaded Poland and France and Belgium and the Netherlands in the late 1930s, early 1940s. So it's very serious. I think it's dominating the news and it's seizing everybody's imagination, and it's very, very, very serious. It's going to be a test of Western resolve and what it's going to do, because of course in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea and held a referendum, the West didn't do all that much. It had noticed the troop buildups, but it didn't respond. Here we've seen shoring up of NATO allies, and tough talk from Western leaders. But yeah, I think this is a very serious situation.
It really is. And
we're probably closer to war than we've been for a long time.
Yeah, and that's worrying. That's very, very worrying. Stephen, I appreciate your time in speaking to us. Stephen Gruzd, Head of Africa-Russia Project at the Institute of SA International Affairs. Stephen, talking about obviously the volatility of the markets. We saw it in the red slightly. I'm not relating that immediately to what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, but more importantly for South Africa, oil prices. Russia, the third biggest oil producer and exporter. So if this were to escalate, without a doubt, we will see some kind of knock-on effect for oil, which will, as we know in South Africa, have an effect on our petrol price.
Yes, and what about the BRICS relationship?
It's very, very tricky. Russia, China, as well. If China takes a different stance to Russia, where does South Africa fit into that as well? What is the West, as far as America is concerned? What's going to be their view of us as a country if we side on with our BRICS agreements? It's fascinating, but it's very, very tricky.
So I'm assuming, President Cyril Ramaphosa, he had been very careful with how he responds, at least publicly, to the developments. All right, Gareth, thanks so much for that conversation. Quite important to know, but also